What would you do if your husband handed you divorce papers the morning after you thought you'd gotten away with everything? How could one night, one innocent walk home, unravel your marriage, your family, and your reputation? This is the story of how I thought I could outsmart everyone, and what happened next when my husband outsmarted me. The downtown wine bar buzzed with Friday night energy as I settled into the plush velvet booth with my sister Fiona. The dim lighting cast flattering shadows across my face, and for the first time in weeks I felt attractive again. At 34, I deserved to feel desired, appreciated, things my boring husband Daniel hadn't made me feel in years. "You look amazing tonight, Isolde," Fiona said, raising her glass of Pinot Grigio. "That dress is perfect on you. Daniel's lucky to have such a gorgeous wife." I forced a smile, though the mention of my husband's name sent a familiar wave of irritation through me. "Thanks, Fee. It's nice to get out and actually feel human again instead of just being mom and wife all the time." The bartender caught my eye as he mixed drinks behind the polished mahogany bar. Travis, according to his name tag, tall, lean, with that effortlessly tousled hair that Daniel could never achieve even with expensive styling products. When he looked up and smiled directly at me, I felt a flutter in my stomach I hadn't experienced in years. My phone buzzed against the table. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. "Hey babe, what time will you be home tonight? Kids are asking about you." I silenced the phone without responding and slipped it into my purse. Fiona raised an eyebrow. "Daniel checking up on you already." "He's so controlling," I said, taking a larger sip of wine than intended. "I can't even have one night out with my sister without him interrogating me about when I'll be home. It's suffocating." "You deserve better than that," Fiona said, her voice taking on that encouraging tone she always used when discussing my marriage. "You're young, beautiful, successful. You shouldn't have to answer to anyone about having a good time." The wine was making me feel bold, confident in ways I'd forgotten were possible. When Travis approached our table to check if we needed anything, I found myself leaning forward slightly, letting my dress show just a hint more than it should. "Everything perfect for you ladies tonight?" he asked, his eyes lingering on mine. "Perfect," I said, holding his gaze longer than necessary. "Though the night is still young." He grinned. "Well, if you need anything at all, just let me know. I'm here until closing." After he walked away, Fiona giggled. "Oh my God, Isolde, he's totally into you." "Don't be ridiculous," I said, but I was smiling. "I'm married." "So? You're not dead. There's nothing wrong with a little harmless flirtation. God knows Daniel probably wouldn't even notice if you came home with someone else's number written on your forehead." My phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel's mother, Evelyn. I declined the call immediately. "His mother now?" Fiona shook her head. "They're probably coordinating their harassment campaign. You know she's never liked you." "She thinks I'm not good enough for her precious son," I said, the wine making me more honest than usual. "Like being a high school math teacher makes him some kind of catch. He's 36 years old and still gets excited about grading papers on Friday nights." "Exactly. You're an HR manager at a major company. You have actual responsibilities, real stress. You deserve someone who appreciates that." As the evening wore on, Travis found excuses to stop by our table more frequently. He recommended wine pairings, shared stories about his part-time music career, and made me laugh in ways Daniel hadn't in months. When Fiona excused herself to the bathroom, he slid into the booth across from me. "So what does a woman like you do when she's not lighting up wine bars?" he asked. "I manage people all day," I said. "Make sure everyone stays in line, follows the rules, does what they're supposed to do. It's exhausting being the responsible one all the time." "Sounds like you need someone to help you break a few rules," he said with a grin that made my pulse quicken. My phone buzzed again. "Daniel, Isolde, kids are worried. Just let me know you're okay." Instead of responding to Daniel, I quickly typed a message. "Working dinner running late. Don't wait up." The lie came so easily it surprised me. "Husband?" Travis asked, noticing my phone. "Unfortunately," I said, then immediately felt guilty for the admission. "I mean, it's complicated." "It always is," he said knowingly, "but life's too short to be complicated all the time." When Fiona returned, she announced she had to leave early. Her babysitter had called with an emergency. "Will you be okay getting home?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew I'd figured out an alternative. "I can make sure she gets home safely," Travis offered, right on cue. I should have said no. I should have called a taxi or asked Fiona to wait. Instead, I heard myself saying, "That would be nice." As we left the bar together, Travis's hand briefly touched the small of my back, guiding me through the crowd. The night air was cool against my flushed skin, and I felt more alive than I had in years. This was what I'd been missing: attention, desire, the thrill of being wanted. "Which way?" he asked as we stepped onto the sidewalk. I pointed toward my neighborhood, acutely aware of how close he was walking beside me. My phone buzzed again in my purse, but I ignored it. For once in my life, I was going to do something just for me, something that made me feel special. What I didn't notice was the dark sedan parked across the street, or the figure sitting motionless behind the wheel, watching every move we made. The 15-minute walk to my neighborhood felt both endless and far too short. Travis walked close enough that our arms occasionally brushed, sending little electric shocks through my wine-warmed system. The streetlights cast long shadows as we meandered through the quiet residential streets, and I found myself walking slower than necessary, prolonging this moment of feeling desired and interesting. "So, tell me about this complicated husband situation," Travis said as we paused at a crosswalk. I laughed, though it came out more bitter than I intended. He's a good man, I suppose, stable, reliable, boring as watching paint dry. We've been married 10 years, and I feel like I'm disappearing a little more each day." "That's rough," he said, his voice gentle with understanding. "You seem way too vibrant to be stuck in something that makes you miserable." "He's not bad," I said quickly, feeling the need to defend my husband even as I criticized him. "He's just safe, predictable. He comes home from his teaching job, grades papers, watches the news, and goes to bed at 10:30. Every single night. I can't remember the last time he surprised me with anything." My phone started ringing in my purse. The sound cut through the night air like an alarm, making me jump slightly. "You should probably get that," Travis said. I pulled out my phone and saw Daniel's name on the screen again. Without thinking, I declined the call and put the phone on silent. "Let me guess," Travis said with a knowing smile. "The husband?" He's probably wondering why I'm not home yet. He gets paranoid when I'm out past 10 o'clock, like I'm going to run off and join the circus or something. "Maybe he has good reason to be worried," Travis said, his eyes meeting mine in a way that made my stomach flutter. We continued walking, and I found myself sharing more than I should have. I told him about Daniel's mother, who called every Sunday to check that I was taking proper care of her son. I complained about how Daniel never wanted to go anywhere or try anything new, how he was content with our small, predictable life while I felt like I was slowly suffocating. "You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are," Travis said as we approached my street. "Someone who makes you feel alive." "I used to feel alive," I said wistfully. "Before marriage, before kids, before I became just another suburban wife whose biggest excitement is choosing between different brands of laundry detergent." When we reached the corner of my street, I should have said goodbye. Instead, I found myself pointing to my house, a modest 2-story colonial, with Daniel's sensible sedan parked in the driveway. "That's me," I said, "the picture of domestic bliss." The house was dark except for the porch light Daniel always left on for me. He was probably already asleep, having given up on waiting for me to come home. The thought should have made me feel guilty, but instead, it just reinforced how little excitement there was in my marriage. "Nice place," Travis said. "Very stable." We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving to end the evening. The wine had left me feeling bold and reckless, like I was someone else entirely, someone interesting and desirable instead of just Isolde the HR manager, Isolde the mother, Isolde the dutiful wife. I should probably go in, I said, but I made no move toward the house. Probably, he agreed, but he stepped closer instead of backing away. Thank you for walking me home, I said. This was nice, really nice. Maybe we could do it again sometime, he said. I mean, if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who gets it. Before I could respond, he leaned in and hugged me. It was supposed to be a friendly goodbye hug, but it lasted longer than it should have. His arms were strong around me, and he smelled like cologne and possibility. For a moment, I let myself melt into it, let myself remember what it felt like to be held by someone who chose to hold me, not someone who hugged me out of marital obligation. When we finally separated, my heart was pounding. Good night, Isolde, he said softly. Good night, I whispered back. I watched him walk away until he disappeared around the corner, then stood there for another moment, trying to collect myself. The smart thing would be to go inside, wash my face, and pretend this evening had been nothing more than innocent fun with my sister. Instead, I found myself replaying every moment, every look, every word that had passed between us. Finally, I walked up the front steps and quietly opened the door. The house was dark and silent, exactly as I'd expected. I slipped off my heels and tiptoed through the foyer, grateful that Daniel was such a heavy sleeper. But as I made my way toward the stairs, I heard a small voice from the top landing. Mommy? I looked up to see my 8-year-old daughter Lily peering through the banister railings, her hair messy from sleep. Hi, baby, I whispered. What are you doing awake? I heard Daddy on the phone, she said. He sounded sad. He kept saying your name. A pang of guilt shot through me, but I pushed it aside. Daddy's fine, sweetheart. Go back to bed. Are you and Daddy fighting? She asked, her voice small and worried. No, baby, everything's fine. Mommy just had dinner with Aunt Fiona. Now go back to sleep. I climbed the stairs and tucked her back into bed, kissing her forehead and whispering reassurances until she settled down. Then I crept down the hall toward the master bedroom, my heart still racing from the evening's events. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I could see Daniel's form under the covers. He was lying on his side, facing away from my side of the bed. For a moment, I stood in the doorway, watching his steady breathing, wondering if he was really asleep or just pretending. I changed into my pajamas as quietly as possible and slipped into bed. Daniel didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. Usually, even when he was deeply asleep, he would reach for me when I got into bed, pulling me close in an unconscious gesture of affection. Tonight, he remained perfectly still. As I lay there in the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The evening with Travis had awakened something in me that I'd thought was dead, a sense of my own desirability, my own worth as something more than just a wife and mother. For the first time in years, I felt like I had options. What I didn't know was that Daniel had been sitting in his car at the end of our street for the past hour, watching everything unfold. He'd seen me walk home with a strange man. He'd witnessed the long hug, the lingering goodbye, the way I'd stood there watching Travis disappear into the night. And now he was lying in our bed, wide awake, trying to decide what to do with that information. I woke up Saturday morning with a slight wine headache and the remnants of the previous night's excitement still buzzing through my system. For a few blissful moments, I lay in bed replaying the evening, Travis's attention, his compliments, the way he'd made me feel interesting and desirable again. Daniel's side of the bed was empty and already made with military precision. I could hear sounds from the kitchen below, the coffee maker gurgling, cabinet doors opening and closing with more force than necessary. He was up early, even for a Saturday. I took my time getting ready, choosing a casual sundress that I knew looked good on me. If Daniel was going to be moody about last night, I wasn't going to let it ruin my good mood. I felt more confident than I had in months, like I'd rediscovered a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. When I entered the kitchen, Daniel was standing at the counter with his back to me, aggressively buttering toast. His shoulders were rigid with tension, and he didn't turn around when I walked in. "Good morning," I said cheerfully, moving to pour myself coffee from the pot he'd made. "Morning," he replied curtly, still not looking at me. I studied his profile as he continued his breakfast preparations. Daniel had always been handsome in a quiet, understated way, the kind of man who grew more attractive as you got to know him. But this morning, there was something different about his demeanor. His jaw was set in a hard line, and there was a coldness in his brown eyes that I rarely saw. "Sleep well?" I asked, settling into my usual chair at the kitchen table. He finally turned to face me, and I was struck by how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept at all. "Not particularly," he said. "I was worried about you. You were out pretty late." I waved dismissively. "It was just dinner with Fiona. You know how she gets when we start talking. Time just flies by." "Dinner," he repeated flatly. "With Fiona." "Yes, dinner with Fiona," I said, irritation creeping into my voice. "Is that a problem?" Daniel set his coffee mug down on the counter with a sharp click. "What time did this dinner end exactly?" "I don't know, Daniel. I wasn't watching the clock. It was a Friday night. I was having fun with my sister. I'm sorry if that inconveniences you." "The kids were worried," he said. "Lily kept asking where you were. Ben wanted to wait up for you to say goodnight." A pang of guilt shot through me, but I pushed it aside. They were fine. Kids are resilient. One night of mommy being out late isn't going to traumatize them. "One night," he said, and there was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," he said, but his eyes never left my face. "So, just you and Fiona then? No one else joined you for this dinner?" The question caught me off guard, though I wasn't sure why. There was no reason Daniel should know about Travis, no way he could have found out about our walk home. Still, something in his tone made me defensive. "Why would you ask that?" "Just curious about your evening. You seemed different when you came home, happier than you've been in a while." "Maybe that's because I got to feel like a human being for a few hours instead of just your wife and the kid's mother," I snapped. "Maybe that's because someone actually listened to me and made me feel interesting for once." The words were out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted the admission. Daniel's face went very still. "Someone?" he asked quietly. "I meant Fiona," I said quickly. "Fiona listened to me. God, Daniel, you're being paranoid. I can't even have a conversation without you reading some hidden meaning into it." "Am I being paranoid?" he asked. "Or am I just paying attention?" "To what?" "There's nothing to pay attention to. I went to dinner with my sister. We talked. I came home. End of story." Daniel nodded slowly, but there was something in his expression that made me uncomfortable. "Right, dinner with Fiona. Got it." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cartoons from the living room where the kids were watching TV. I sipped my coffee and tried to recapture the confidence I'd felt when I woke up, but Daniel's strange mood was throwing me off balance. "Are you going to tell me what's really bothering you?" I asked finally. "Because this passive-aggressive thing isn't attractive." He looked at me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing something I didn't want him to see. "Nothing's bothering me," he said. "I'm just trying to understand my wife better. Apparently, I've been failing at that for a while now." "Daniel, don't be dramatic. I just needed a night out. Every married woman needs that sometimes." "Of course," he said. "Every married woman needs to feel interesting." There was something in the way he said it that made my skin crawl, but before I could respond, Lily and Ben burst into the kitchen, demanding breakfast and attention. Daniel immediately shifted into dad mode, helping them pour cereal and settle at the table, but I noticed he avoided looking at me directly. As I watched him interact with our children, patient, loving, completely present, I felt a confusing mix of affection and resentment. This was the Daniel I'd fallen in love with years ago, the man who would make an excellent father. But it was also the Daniel who never surprised me, never made my heart race, never made me feel like the most important person in the room. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it casually, expecting it to be from Fiona, but the name on the screen made my pulse quicken. Travis. Had a great time talking with you last night. Hope we can do it again soon. I quickly deleted the message and slipped the phone back into my purse, but not before Daniel noticed my reaction. Everything okay? He asked. Just work stuff, I lied smoothly. You know how it is. On a Saturday morning. Emergencies don't follow a schedule, Daniel. Some of us have demanding jobs. It was a low blow and I knew it. Daniel's face tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he focused on cutting up Ben's toast, his movements precise and controlled. After breakfast, Daniel announced he was taking the kids to the park. Usually, Saturday mornings were family time, but he didn't invite me to come along. We'll be back in a couple hours, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Maybe you can use the time to catch up on work stuff. After they left, I found myself alone in the house with my thoughts and the memory of Travis's text. I should have felt guilty about the lie, about the way I was treating Daniel, about the growing distance between us. Instead, I felt exhilarated by the secret, by the knowledge that someone found me attractive enough to text the morning after meeting me. I was so caught up in my own thoughts that I didn't notice Daniel's wedding ring sitting on the kitchen counter until I went to clean up the breakfast dishes. He never took off his wedding ring, not to shower, not to sleep, not for anything. In 10 years of marriage, I'd never seen his ring finger bare, but there it sat, a simple gold band catching the morning sunlight streaming through the window, abandoned on the granite countertop like a statement I wasn't ready to understand. By Monday morning, I'd convinced myself that Daniel leaving his wedding ring on the counter had been an accident. Maybe he'd taken it off to wash dishes and forgotten to put it back on. Maybe it had gotten soap residue on it and needed cleaning. There were perfectly innocent explanations that didn't involve my husband making some kind of dramatic statement about our marriage. But when I tried to bring it up casually over breakfast, Daniel just shrugged and said he'd been thinking about some things and needed space to process. When I pressed him for details, he simply said he'd rather not discuss it in front of the children. The unease I'd been feeling since Saturday morning intensified, but I pushed it aside. I had work to focus on, responsibilities that demanded my attention. At the office, I threw myself into my HR duties with renewed energy, feeling competent and in control in ways that my home life no longer provided. It was Tuesday afternoon when my carefully constructed sense of normalcy began to crumble. I was meeting my friend Sarah at our usual cafe for lunch when I noticed the way she kept glancing around nervously, as if she was afraid of being overheard. "So," she said after we'd ordered, her voice lower than usual, "how are things with you and Daniel?" "Fine," I said automatically. "Why do you ask?" "It's just, well, Jennifer mentioned she saw you Friday night at that wine bar downtown, with some guy." My blood went cold, but I kept my expression neutral. "I was out with Fiona. Maybe she saw us talking to the bartender or something." "The bartender," Sarah repeated, and there was something in her tone that made me look at her more closely. "Is that what we're calling him?" "Sarah, what are you getting at?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice even further. "Jen said she saw you leave with him. Said you two looked pretty friendly." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Jennifer needs to mind her own business. I don't know what she thinks she saw, but... "Isolde," Sarah interrupted gently. "She took a picture." The words hit me like a physical blow. "She what?" "She was there with her book club and she saw you. She thought it was weird because she knew Daniel wasn't with you, so she took a picture. She showed it to me because she was worried about you." My mouth went dry. "Worried about me how?" Sarah pulled out her phone and, After a moment's hesitation, turned it toward me. The image was grainy and taken from a distance, but it was unmistakably me standing outside the wine bar with Travis. We were standing close together, and even in the poor lighting, our body language looked intimate. This doesn't look like talking to a bartender, Isolde. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. It's not what it looks like. He offered to walk me home because Fiona had to leave early. It was completely innocent. He walked you home? Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Isolde, please tell me you didn't... I didn't do anything wrong, I said, my voice rising enough to draw looks from other cafe patrons. I lowered it again, hissing, we walked and talked, that's it. God, can't a married woman have a conversation with another human being without everyone assuming the worst? But even as I said it, I knew how it sounded, how it looked. The photo captured a moment that, while technically innocent, suggested something more. Does Daniel know? Sarah asked. There's nothing for Daniel to know, I said firmly, and I'd appreciate it if you'd ask Jennifer to keep her opinions and her camera to herself. Sarah looked uncomfortable. Isolde, I'm your friend. I'm trying to help you here. If people are talking... What people? Who else has seen this? Well, Jennifer showed it to her book club, and I think she mentioned it to her neighbor, who goes to Daniel's school. My heart sank. Daniel taught at the local high school, where gossip spread faster than wildfire. If word of this reached his colleagues, it would be humiliating for him. This is ridiculous, I said, standing abruptly. I'm not going to sit here and defend myself for having a conversation with someone. I haven't done anything wrong. But as I walked back to my office, I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in around me. The photo, while innocent enough, told a story that wasn't entirely false. I had been attracted to Travis. I had enjoyed his attention. I had let him walk me home and lingered in that goodbye hug longer than I should have. The problem wasn't that I'd done something unforgivable. The problem was that I'd wanted to. That evening, Daniel was even more distant than he'd been over the weekend. He spoke to the children normally, but his interactions with me were limited to necessary household communications. When I tried to tell him about my day, he listened politely but didn't engage. When I asked about his day, he gave short, factual responses that shut down further conversation. It was during dinner that Lily, with the devastating honesty of an 8-year-old, asked, "Daddy, why aren't you wearing your wedding ring anymore?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Ben looked up from his mac and cheese, suddenly interested in the adult conversation. I felt my face flush as I waited for Daniel's response. Sometimes grown-ups need to think about things, Daniel said carefully. The ring is just in a safe place while I'm thinking. Thinking about what? Lily pressed. Lily, eat your dinner, I interjected, but she ignored me. Are you and Mommy getting divorced like Tommy's parents? No one's getting divorced, I said quickly, shooting a look at Daniel. Daddy's just being dramatic about nothing. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond directly to my comment. Instead, he told the children, Your mother and I are working through some things, but no matter what happens, we both love you very much. The phrase, no matter what happens, sent a chill through me. It sounded like he was preparing them for something, laying groundwork for a conversation I wasn't ready to have. After dinner, I cornered him in the kitchen while the kids watched TV. We need to talk, I said. Do we? He asked, loading dishes into the dishwasher with mechanical precision. Daniel, this is getting out of hand. You're acting like I committed some terrible crime and I haven't done anything wrong. He paused, a plate halfway to the dishwasher rack. Haven't you? No, I haven't. I went out with Fiona, I talked to some people, I came home. End of story. Is it? He turned to face me fully for the first time in days. Because I've been hearing some interesting stories about your evening out. My stomach dropped. What kind of stories? The kind where my colleagues ask me if everything's okay at home. The kind where people I've worked with for years suddenly can't make eye contact with me. The kind where I have to pretend I know what they're talking about when they mentioned seeing my wife with another man. So the rumors had reached his school. I felt a flash of anger at Jennifer and her meddling, but also a growing sense of panic. People are gossiping about nothing, I said. You know how small towns are. Someone sees a married woman talking to a man who isn't her husband, and suddenly it's a scandal. Talking, Daniel repeated. Is that what we're calling it? There was something in his tone that made me study his face more carefully. His expression was calm, but there was a hardness in his eyes that I'd never seen before. What exactly do you think happened, Daniel? I think, he said slowly, that my wife has been lying to me. I think she's been disrespecting our marriage and our family. And I think she's been counting on me being too trusting or too stupid to notice. The accusation stung because it was partially true. I had been counting on his trust, on his tendency to give me the benefit of the doubt. You're being paranoid, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Am I? He closed the dishwasher and turned to face me fully. Then you won't mind if I ask you directly. Did you come straight home Friday night after dinner with Fiona? The question was a trap, and we both knew it. If I lied and he somehow knew the truth, I'd be caught. If I told the truth, I'd have to explain Travis. I don't like being interrogated in my own kitchen, I said instead. And I don't like being made a fool of in my own town, he replied. But here we are. We stared at each other across the kitchen island, and I realized that something fundamental had shifted between us. The Daniel I'd married, trusting, patient, willing to overlook my flaws, was gone. In his place was a stranger who looked at me with cool assessment rather than love. I'm going to bed, I said finally. Good idea, he said. Maybe tomorrow you'll be ready to have an honest conversation. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Daniel moving around downstairs, long after his usual bedtime, I wasn't thinking about honesty. I was thinking about how to regain control of a situation that was spiraling away from me faster than I could manage. What I didn't know was that Daniel was sitting at his computer, methodically documenting everything he'd learned over the past few days. Times, dates, witness statements, and a growing collection of evidence that would soon make my small deceptions look much larger than I'd ever intended them to be. The next few days passed in a cold war of silence and careful politeness. Daniel continued to be an attentive father, but his interactions with me were limited to necessary household communications delivered in a tone that was professionally courteous and personally devastating. I tried to convince myself that he was overreacting, that his hurt feelings and wounded pride would eventually give way to forgiveness and a return to our normal routine. After all, I hadn't actually cheated. I hadn't done anything that couldn't be explained away as innocent socializing taken out of context by small-town gossips. But Daniel's behavior suggested he was operating from information I didn't have access to. He was too calm, too methodical in his distance. This wasn't the emotional reaction of a hurt husband. This was something more calculating. It was Thursday evening when everything began to unravel completely. I was helping Lily with her homework at the kitchen table when Daniel came home from work carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression I couldn't read. He kissed both children on the head, greeted me with a polite nod, and disappeared into his home office. An hour later, after the kids were settled in front of a movie, I decided to try once more to bridge the gap between us. I knocked on his office door and entered without waiting for permission. Daniel was sitting at his desk, the manila folder open in front of him. When he saw me, he calmly closed it and gave me his full attention. We need to end this, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. This cold shoulder treatment isn't fair to me or the kids. Whatever you think happened, whatever people are saying, we can work through it. Can we? He asked. Of course we can. Daniel, I love you. I love our family. I made some poor choices about how I spent my Friday evening, but nothing happened that can't be forgiven. He nodded thoughtfully. Poor choices. That's an interesting way to put it. I should have been more careful about appearances. I should have come straight home after dinner with Fiona instead of letting some guy walk me home. I can see how that might look bad. Letting some guy walk you home, he repeated. So you admit you lied about coming straight home? I realized I'd made a tactical error, but it was too late to take it back. I didn't lie, I just didn't mention every detail of the evening. It didn't seem important. He opened the folder again and pulled out a photograph. Would you say this seems important? He slid the photo across the desk to me, and my blood turned to ice. It was a much clearer image than the one Sarah had shown me, a high-resolution shot that showed me and Travis standing outside my house, clearly visible in the glow of the porch light. We were embracing, and even I had to admit it looked intimate. Where did you get this? I whispered. Does it matter? I stared at the photo, my mind racing. This wasn't taken from inside the cafe by Jennifer's book club. This was taken from much closer, with a better camera, by someone who had followed us to my house. Daniel, I can explain. Can you? He pulled out another photo, this one showing Travis and me walking down the street, heads close together in conversation. Then another, showing us pausing at the crosswalk, his hand on my arm. You had me followed? I asked, incredulous. I didn't have to, he said calmly. I followed you myself. The words hit me like a physical blow. You what? I drove by the wine bar around 10:30 to see if you needed a ride home. Imagine my surprise when I saw you leaving with a man I'd never seen before. I felt the blood drain from my face. You were there. I was there. I followed you home. I watched you let him walk you to our front door. Watched you stand there talking and laughing. Watched you hug him like you hadn't hugged me in months. The calm, matter-of-fact way he delivered this information was more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. This was Daniel as I'd never seen him. Methodical, prepared, unshakable in his certainty. It wasn't what it looked like, I said weakly. What did it look like, Isolde? It looked like I was enjoying another man's attention. But that doesn't mean... It looked like my wife was on a date with another man. It looked like she was lying to me about where she was and who she was with. It looked like she brought another man to our home while our children were sleeping upstairs. Each word was delivered with surgical precision, cutting through my defenses and leaving me exposed. I didn't bring him inside, I said desperately. Nothing happened. We talked. We walked. That's all. You lied to me, he said simply. You looked me in the eye the next morning and lied to me repeatedly. You gaslit me when I asked direct questions. You made me feel like I was being paranoid and controlling for having perfectly reasonable concerns about my wife's behavior. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the evidence was literally spread across his desk. Photos that showed exactly what had happened, time-stamped and undeniable. I was confused, I said finally. I was feeling unappreciated and lonely, and when someone paid attention to me, I made poor choices. But I love you, Daniel. I love our family. This doesn't have to destroy everything. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with that same clinical assessment I'd been seeing for days. Do you know what the hardest part has been? He asked finally. It's not that you were attracted to someone else. It's not even that you acted on that attraction. It's that you've been sitting at our breakfast table for 5 days, looking me in the eye and continuing to lie. I haven't been lying. You have. He pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. This is our shared tablet, the one the kids use for games, the one that syncs all our messages. My heart stopped. I'd forgotten about the shared account, forgotten that any messages I received would appear on all our connected devices. Had a great time talking with you last night, he read aloud. Hope we can do it again soon. From Travis, Saturday morning at 9:15 a.m. Would you like to explain that message, Isolde? I felt like I was drowning. It's not what you think. What I think, he said, standing up from his chair, is that my wife has been having an emotional affair. What I think is that she's been lying to me, manipulating me, and disrespecting our marriage. What I think is that she's more concerned with protecting her secret than she is with protecting our family. Daniel, please. I've made an appointment with a lawyer, he said quietly. I wanted to give you one more chance to be honest with me, to take responsibility for what you've done and work toward fixing it, but you can't even do that. The words hit me like a physical blow. A lawyer? Daniel, you're being dramatic. This is salvageable. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. Can we? Because from where I'm sitting, you're still more concerned with minimizing your actions than owning up to them. You're still trying to convince me that what I saw with my own eyes didn't happen. I realized that I was losing him, that my attempts to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly. In trying to protect myself, I'd made everything worse. What do you want me to say? I asked desperately. What do you want me to do? I wanted you to tell me the truth, he said sadly. I wanted you to respect me enough to be honest about what happened and why it happened. I wanted you to fight for our marriage instead of fighting to protect your lies. I am fighting for our marriage. No, he said, gathering up the photos and returning them to the folder. You're fighting to avoid consequences. There's a difference. He walked to the door, then paused and looked back at me. I'll be staying at my mother's for a few days while I figure out next steps. The kids can stay here with you, but I'll be picking them up for school and bringing them home afterward. I think it's best if we limit our interactions until we both have legal representation. Legal representation? Daniel, this is insane. You're talking about destroying our family over one evening of poor judgment. I'm talking about protecting what's left of my self-respect, he said, and protecting our children from a marriage that's become toxic. After he left, I sat alone in his office, staring at the closed folder and trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 20 minutes, my marriage had gone from damaged but repairable to heading toward divorce court. The worst part was that I couldn't even argue with his evidence. Every photo, every message, every timeline he'd presented was accurate. I had lied, repeatedly and convincingly. I had gaslit him when he'd asked reasonable questions. I had prioritized protecting my secret over protecting his feelings. But it had just been one evening, one moment of weakness, one small rebellion against the monotony of my life. How had it escalated so quickly into the destruction of everything I'd built? As I sat there in the growing darkness, I began to realize that Daniel had been planning this confrontation for days. The calm demeanor, the organized evidence, the lawyer consultation, none of this was spontaneous. While I'd been congratulating myself on managing the situation, he'd been methodically building a case against me. For the first time since this whole mess began, I understood that I might have seriously underestimated my quiet, predictable husband. The weekend passed in a surreal haze of normalcy and underlying panic. Daniel kept his word about maintaining routines for the children. He picked them up Saturday morning for a trip to the Science Museum, brought them home for lunch, then took them to his mother's house for the afternoon. Through it all, he was polite, but distant with me, treating me like a cordial acquaintance rather than his wife of 10 years. I spent the time alone trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. I called Fiona, who was appropriately outraged on my behalf, and insisted that Daniel was overreacting to what amounted to an innocent flirtation. I considered reaching out to Travis to ask him not to contact me anymore, but realized that would only provide more evidence of the connection Daniel was convinced existed. By Sunday evening, I'd convinced myself that once the initial shock wore off, Daniel would realize he was throwing away a decade of marriage over a moment of poor judgment. We could go to counseling, rebuild trust, maybe even come out stronger on the other side. I was wrong. Monday morning, Daniel arrived at 8 a.m. sharp to pick up the kids for school. He was dressed in his best suit, the charcoal grey one he usually reserved for parent-teacher conferences and school board meetings. When I commented on it, he simply said he had meetings scheduled for the day. What kind of meetings? I asked, but he was already herding Lily and Ben toward the car. I'll bring them home around 4, he said without answering my question. We'll need to talk this evening. The formal tone sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just Daniel being dramatic. He'd always had a flair for the theatrical when his feelings were hurt. I was wrong about that too. At 3:30, there was a knock at the front door. I opened it to find a young woman in a business suit holding an official-looking envelope. The process server's words echoed as I tore open the envelope on the living room floor. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Daniel had filed. Primary custody sought, citing adultery and abandonment of parental duties. Exclusive use of the home requested. Financial accounts to be separated immediately. Attached was his affidavit, photos with timestamps, text screenshots from Travis, a meticulous log of every lie I'd told, every time I'd gaslit him when confronted. Reading it felt like watching my own life through a stranger's cold lens, calculating, manipulative, selfish. Daniel arrived with the children at 4. Kids, wash up for snacks, he said calmly, then met my eyes. You got the papers. Daniel, this is insane. One night, one mistake, and you're ending everything. One night? His voice stayed even. This is months of lies, secrecy, and prioritizing your wants over our family. You taught our children that love is disposable. Lily appeared in the doorway. Are you and Mommy getting divorced? Daniel knelt. Yes, sweetheart, but we both love you and Ben more than anything. I sat frozen among the scattered documents while he took them upstairs. When he returned, his gaze was steady. This isn't revenge, it's self-respect. I can't stay married to someone who lies effortlessly and chooses strangers over her family. 6 months later, I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, seeing the kids every other weekend. Daniel kept the house, primary custody, and his dignity. Travis barely remembered our night. The man I'd risked everything for had seen me as a fleeting distraction. Lily once said, Daddy's new girlfriend is nice. She never lies to him like you did. That truth cut deepest. I'd destroyed a good marriage chasing validation that vanished the moment consequences arrived. Daniel had quietly documented every betrayal while I convinced myself it was harmless. I'd underestimated him and overestimated myself. Now I lived with the consequences, a cautionary tale in my own life.